Welcome to myFace, myStory, voices from the craniofacial community, with your host, Dina Zuckerberg.
Hello, and welcome to myFace, myStory, voices from the craniofacial community. Whether you're watching on YouTube or listening on Apple Podcasts, click subscribe now so that you'll never miss a future episode. And if you're a fan of myFace, myStory, rate and review the program on Apple Podcasts so we can get our message of inclusivity and empowerment to more people. I'm your host, Dina Zuckerberg, the Director of Family Programs at myFace. I was born with a cleft lip, a hearing loss, and no vision in my left eye. myFace, myStory is about people like us being seen and heard, about sharing stories within the craniofacial community and with others. Today, I will be joined by Ruth Rathblott. Ruth is an expert on inclusivity and diversity. She is a TEDx and inspirational speaker, best-selling author, and an award-winning former nonprofit leader. She was born with a limb difference and speaks with leaders on issues of equity and belonging, the gifts of being unique, and the freedom of accepting your differences. Ruth was profiled as a CEO in the New York Times corner office and received Goucher College's Excellence in Public Service Award, among other awards, for her outstanding leadership in the nonprofit sector. She has spent her entire career focused on providing opportunities for those who have been underrepresented. She serves as a board member of the Lucky Finn Project, and a fun fact, Ruth and I both went to the same college. Welcome, Ruth.
Hi there, Dina.
Hi. I look forward to our conversation. I read your book single-handedly, Learning to Unhide and Embrace Connection, and I couldn't put it down. It resonated with me on such a personal level in so many ways. So I'm excited for our conversation today.
Me too. And I love the fact that we went to college together. So that's a starting place, but also thank you for reading the book and I'm glad it resonated and I can't wait to dig in to see where it resonated.
Okay. So can you tell us about how your parents found out that you had a limb difference and share with us about your limb difference? Take us back to when you were born and what happened after that, and how did your parents react?
Sure. If you can imagine, Dina, it was the days before sonograms and ultrasounds. And so it was while I was born in June and they expected my birth, what they didn't expect and the surprise was that I was born with a limb difference. I was born missing my left hand. And so when I was in that hospital, birthed my mom, and I came out, the doctors didn't really know a lot about limb differences. The nurses didn't know a lot about limb differences. And so what happened is in that moment, I was swept away from my mother, taken to a different space, to be cleaned up, but also to be handled and looked at. And my father was taken out of the room by the doctor because the doctor needed to talk to my father about me and make sure that he would be a support to my mom. And when they both came back into the room and were kind of huddled together next to the bed, and my father was explaining to my mom what happened, they were absolutely shocked. They were surprised. And I think they were also disheartened because they were concerned about what that meant, because nobody had any information. And luckily for them, Dina, a nurse came back into the room with me, and she noticed my parents kind of wallowing and definitely comforting each other. And she brought me over and she said, listen, you're going to take this little girl home. You're going to love her like you would any other child. You're going to treat her as normal. And that's exactly what they did. They treated me as quote unquote normal, meaning they encouraged me to try everything from gymnastics to theater to sports, etc. They encouraged me to try everything. And that was super powerful to have that message from my parents. What was missing, Dina, is that we didn't talk about my difference. And so while they treated me quote unquote as normal, there were spaces. I have a disability, and that wasn't talked about. So that definitely was one of the pieces and impetuses of me hiding. But we'll get into that, I'm sure.
Right. And I think you and I both grew up in an era at a time when you didn't talk about your feelings about what was going on, and you didn't talk openly about it, especially I think even in the family dynamic.
Absolutely.
So I can relate to that. And I think today there's much more of an option to talk about all that.
And I
But
think that we have resources now to talk about it, right? Like organizations like myFace are places where families can get information at birth
right,
or before birth, pre-birth. They can get it after birth, and they can start to build community around information and resources and support. I think about my parents, Dina, and I imagine yours too. Like they were alone in navigating all of
exactly.
this. And so you're right. There wasn't a lot of space to talk about it. And they didn't have a lot of information or support for themselves either.
Right. And also my parents also encouraged me to, like, they led me to believe I could do anything I wanted. So despite my challenges, and I grew up that way. And so I ski and I ride a bicycle and I play the piano. I did all of that, and I never felt that I had limitations. And I guess because I was also, it was how I was born that way. So I never knew anything other than that. So
Same. No,
yeah,
same. And I think that encouragement, I always talk to parents now about continue to encourage it. And I add and create space so that when we get to that teenage self, which is all about fitting in and needing to, differentiate and individuate from our parents, create the space that because there are going to be things that we need to talk about, even though we tell you everything is fine.
right. Exactly. I came home from school and every day I said everything was fine. Everything was
Right.
fine. Everything was great. So speaking of teenage years, I know for me, I hid my differences because I wanted to fit in, to be like the others, to not stand out. When did you start hiding your hand and why?
You and I probably had very similar experiences. It was my first day of freshman year of high school that I remember getting on the yellow school bus to head to a new school. And, in high school, everything is magnified in terms of fitting in, right? Because
Hmm.
that's what we look around. We want to wear the coolest clothes. We want to have the coolest accessories. We want to have friends. And so I got onto that yellow school bus and I started to look at who was getting on and would I be friends with them. And then at one moment, someone stared just a little bit too long at my
Mm,
hand. And an impulse reaction for me was to literally take my hand and slip it into my front left pocket. And I told myself I would just do it for the bus ride. Like I was like, just get through the bus ride so nobody else looks at you like that. And then I got to school and I noticed people looking at each other like I was checking people out. And I thought, you know what? I'll just do it for the first day. Like I'll just keep my hand there. I had never hidden my hand before.
right,
This was new behavior, but a new thought. Like I just wanted to fit in. And that first day turned into that first week. And that first week turned into that first year. And I told myself when I went back for my second year of high school that I would, come back and stop hiding it. But hiding for me meant putting it in my pocket, wearing longer sleeves so that you wouldn't see it, hiding it under book bags and books and bags so that no one would see it. Even though I promised myself I would come back that second year, it just got quote unquote too easy to hide it because it started to get harder to tell people. Like I didn't want to all of a sudden surprise people and be different.
right.
So I went with this MO of being somebody who had two hands. You just never saw the other one.
Hmm.
And I even told myself after high school going to college, wow, in college, I can be someone new because I get a chance to start over. And told myself, just show up that first day showing your hand. And I couldn't do it because I had been so used to for 4 years hiding it. And I'd gotten so comfortable with the certainty of knowing how it was going to look, how I was presenting myself, that when I went to college, I did the same thing and I kept hiding
Right.
it.
So because I couldn't fully accept my differences, I feel like I missed out on so much in my life especially during my younger years. And when I was hiding parts of myself, trying to be someone I was not, it was hard to connect with others. It's still challenging, even in my 50s. I feel like it's a journey, right? So I know you can relate. Can you talk about that?
Absolutely. So I hid for 25 years.
Well,
And I think to your questions, I think there's three parts. One is, I think the prevention of living my life fully is absolutely true. In terms of, there were things that I stopped doing. So I stopped doing theater, which I loved because I didn't want to show anyone my hand. I stopped doing student government through high school and college because I didn't want to. And yet I'd been middle school president just the year before I started hiding it. So those things, I stopped doing sports. I stopped doing the things I love because I was so worried and forecasting next steps so as not to be discovered by anyone, that it stopped me from living the parts of my life that I enjoyed before that. So I stopped that. And then I think to your second piece, it stopped me from really connecting with people because people were only seeing a part of me. I was super focused, almost to the point of obsession, about hiding it because I was so worried that people wouldn't like me if they found out. They wouldn't be my friend. They wouldn't date me. I was worried about all of the aspects of relationships if people found out, because I had built an image in my head, Dina, that my hand was so much worse than it was. And that story just kept getting perpetuated. And so it was this block of living life. And it kept me feeling disconnected from others and also from myself. I refused to talk to people with disabilities. That was something I also didn't want to see. So I couldn't even find community within people who had disabilities or differences because I was so not wanting to associate. So yes, it was disconnecting from parts of my life I enjoyed, and it was disconnecting from people and connection.
Right. I feel like I built a wall in some ways. I think.
Totally.
Yeah.
And put up some tests for people to pass to get over that wall. I mean, it's a lot to get people through that wall. And I don't know about you, but for me, with the connection part, it was almost like even if they passed those tests and that wall, I still felt like there was no way that they didn't think there was something less about me. Because I felt there was something less about me.
Right. And in some ways, we make it so much bigger than others.
Totally. I often say that my hand was actually never my disability. The way I thought about it was.
It's interesting. Yeah. So I think most of us hide things about ourselves that we don't want others to see or know. Do you think it's universal?
Hiding is absolutely universal. And there was a study by Deloitte in 2013 that showed that 61% of people in the workplace are hiding parts of themselves. I think that number is actually higher because when we talk about hiding and covering, some people don't own what they're hiding. And I think during COVID times, we have been allowed in some ways to hide a little bit more.
I was just going to say, yeah.
So yes, I think hiding is universal. And it isn't just about disability, right? The visible or the invisible disabilities that some of us have. It's also about, I mean, I've had people, Dina, tell me they hide their religion, they hide their ethnicity, they hide their speech patterns, they hide their politics. People are hiding things all the time for fear of judgment, for fear of rejection, for fear of not being seen as able.
Right. Yeah, I think fear of rejection is a big one. It can be a big one. Yeah. So when was the first, did you decide you didn't want to hide anymore? And what allowed you to stop hiding? Take us on that journey.
Sure. Hiding, as I said before, is exhausting. It's exhausting and it's lonely, like we've both pointed out. You put up these walls. And at some point, I got so exhausted. And I thought, I will never have full relationships with people if I don't stop this. And I needed to first think about, for myself, I needed to understand what I was hiding. I needed to own it. I actually had gone to therapists, and one therapist in particular that I talk about in Single-Handedly, I went to, and he asked me during several sessions, can I just see your hand?
Right.
And I had built it up that it was so awful that I thought he would kick me out of therapy because he couldn't take
Wow.
it. And so I got to that place of being so exhausted and thinking I was so alone that at one point I actually took a step to invite someone in to be part of my life, to show me how to unhide. And I did. I invited them in with the idea that could they talk to me about it? And I felt like they were safe. It was just one person initially.
Mm.
And they actually showed me how to look at my hand. They took it out of my pocket with me physically and how to look at it, how to touch it. I had never touched my hand before. I had never looked at it. I didn't think about it in terms of it had been buried so deeply in my pocket that I'd never even known how to take care of it. It gets frostbite every winter because I didn't know how to take care of it. And so by inviting that person in, I allowed them to show me how to love that part of myself that I deemed unlovable for so long. And what that started to do is I started getting comfortable talking about it and looking at it and touching it. I started to notice other people with disabilities and differences. And luckily for me, I was in a random drugstore, Duane Reade here in New York City. And I looked over and I saw a woman with one hand like mine. And we started talking about our difference and our disability. And she, toward the end of the conversation, said, well, we're not alone in this. And I said, what do you mean? And she said, I know I've seen probably a few people here and there. She's like, oh, no. There's a whole community online called the Lucky Finn Project, where it's people with limb differences like ours around the world.
Right.
Dina, I had thought I was alone my whole life.
Right.
I didn't realize that. And I went home that day, rushed home actually, and looked online. And at that point, there were 30,000 people that were part of this group. It's now over 70,000 people of families and kids and adults with limb differences. And it was amazing to know, hey, that looks like mine. Like that, what? And they've had similar experiences. And Dina, they have a picnic every summer. And I went. And it was amazing. Because then I got to understand I wasn't alone.
Right.
We had shared experiences. I didn't invent hiding. I thought I was the only one that I had invented hiding. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And
you think you're the only one in the universe.
You think you're the only one.
Yeah.
And the other beauty, and I imagine, I'm not sure, but I bet you're going to nod on this, is that there were also young people, young kids and families who then got to also see me as a role model in terms of, oh, wow, she's going to be okay. Or he's going to be okay because there's another adult that has been through this, who has a successful career, has found relationship with others. They're going to be okay because parents worry no matter what about their kids.
So much.
Parents,
and they can't see beyond a week or a year even.
No. So it's being able to be a role model too. And so that then allowed me to not only find community, but then to start to share my story out.
Yeah. I always say there's power in the shared story and knowing you're not alone. And I think it's so true. And I found that community 30 years ago when I joined a group of individuals with craniofacial differences. And I was so hesitant at first because I was worried about, I wanted to fit in. I didn't want to associate or be part of that community, but it really changed my life in so many ways. And I realized I wasn't alone. I wasn't the only one.
And no, I think, and you bring up a really good point too, because there's fitting into the world, right? And then there's even fitting into a community of difference. And how do you show up? Like, I remember driving to my first picnic, and it was only a few years ago. And I thought, well, wait, how am I going to be like me? Like, because everyone has the same thing. Well, how am I going to be different? And sure enough, I found that very easily. Like,
right.
But yeah, I think it is the power of community and that shared story that's incredible. And I love the work that you're doing because I think it is so powerful. And helping young people but helping people within the community is important.
Right. And finding your voice. There's that time when you find your voice. And I still say it's a journey because I'm still on this journey.
Totally.
And I have a lot to learn and do, but from where I was. I mean, from my college days to where I am now, I am a completely different person.
Yeah.
So,
No, and I say it's a continuum. It's that same word
right,
of journey. It's like there's hiding and then there's unhiding, and you can be hiding in one aspect of your life and unhiding in another, but sometimes there's still places I struggle.
right,
And it's continually learning and talking about it and journaling about it and doing the work.
exactly. So there is so much talk about diversity and inclusion in the workplace, and I know you are focused on that in the work that you're doing. What are the key messages you deliver, and how can everyone do a better job, do you think?
Yes. So this is a big one
Yeah.
because a few things. One is, and it started because I was in a conversation about leadership and diversity. And at one point during the conversation, I asked the question, do you see me as diverse?
Hmm.
And the answer back was, oh, you know what? You're a woman, so that checks a box of diversity. But what I said, well, what about my disability? And they said, oh, well, we don't see you like that. And I said, I'm not asking to be seen like that. I'm asking for it to be acknowledged as part of diversity.
Right.
And when I started to go out and talk to companies and workplaces across the city at first, I asked them, how are you defining diversity? And often we talk about race, we talk about gender, and maybe sexual orientation, which are important pillars. I want to be clear, like they're important pillars of the diversity conversation. And disability, the visible and the invisible, are often left out of the conversation.
Hmm.
And it was particularly interesting during George Floyd's death and Black Lives Matter rising that 90% of companies were prioritizing DEI efforts internally and making it a bigger deal, like really embracing diversity. And only 4% of those companies were even talking about disability as part of the agenda.
Right.
And so I started to recognize disability is the largest minority group out there. Disability doesn't discriminate. You can be any age. Like we're both born with a disability. You can
Right.
be acquire one at some point of your life, or you can be taking care of someone with a disability.
Right.
It doesn't discriminate around age, gender, race, sexual orientation. Disability is actually a conversation for all of us.
Right.
And so as I started to talk to companies, they started to understand that lens, and we started to talk together about how leadership has a role in the disability and in valuing different perspectives and different experiences. And so that's the work now is I work with leaders to expand the diversity conversation to help their employees unhide, thrive, and belong. Because that population of employees who are hiding, sometimes it's because of the way we define diversity.
Right. And I agree. I think disability and like facial differences even is not part of the conversation currently. It's barely part of the conversation. And it's something I think we need to do a better job of thinking about, especially in the workplace, but even elsewhere. And another thing is media representation for those with disabilities and differences is a whole nother area that we are just beginning to crack the surface of.
Listen, most of us have recently watched movies, and I know the Oscars were recent. So being able to think about, a representation just even on screen, how do we raise awareness around disability using media, and how do we also allow for opportunities for disability in media? Because it's both. It's how are we portraying people, and how are we actually granting them access, both in media, but I would argue too in the workplace, because disability needs to be thought of as part of the whole talent life cycle for HR. In terms of how we're bringing people in, how we're engaging them and providing accommodation and accessibility, and how we're creating exit plans for them when they leave. How are we hearing that information about inclusion?
Right.
We have a lot of work to do still. And
Absolutely.
Judy Heumann started us on this journey, right? In many ways.
Right.
And we have a lot of work to do still.
Absolutely. So I love the title of your book, Single-Handedly. I resonated so much with your story in so many ways, and I feel like your story is my story as we've been talking. Was it hard for you to put it out there into the world in such a vulnerable way, and what has been the response?
It's interesting. two things I'll say to that first question, which are, I think that a lot of people, when you want to write a book, a lot of people give you a lot of ideas about what you should write, right? Like how they tell you, oh, well, I was told, write the top 10 questions that people ask you when you speak, or write about disability in terms of what needs to change in diversity on a very high macro kind of level. And when I was talking with the book coach who I worked with around my book, it kept coming back to, what did people like when I talked about my journey? They liked my stories. They liked how I talked about hiding, because to your point, it resonated. And they liked how there was a solution around unhiding, that there was a place I got to of inviting that person in, finding that community, sharing out my story. And so I knew there was no other way to do it but to share that vulnerable journey and tell people, let them in, because otherwise it wasn't going to be my book. And so I knew also with the title, during the pandemic, I had started a blog called Single-Handedly New York City. Because when we think about people in New York specifically during the pandemic, and I was doing things, I was living alone, single-handedly conjures up this idea of strength. It conjures up this you can do it attitude. And it just so happens I have one hand. So I was literally single-handed and doing everything single-handedly in New York City. And I have throughout my life. So it made sense. I think what's been amazing at the reaction, Dina, is very similar to what you just shared. I expected it a little bit from, I'll say a lot, from the limb difference community, people saying, oh, that's my story, that resonates. And I think even in the disability community, I think I don't know if I was totally expecting it, but I think I was, oh, that probably makes sense. Some of these things will make sense. I think where I was shocked is the amount of hiding that's going on in terms of people's life that has nothing to do with disability, visible or invisible. It's the people who talk about, and the pain that they talk about of hiding. I had just someone I was on a plane with recently talk about how they were hiding their education level because they dropped out of high school. And so they talked about that when they're in conversations and people say, oh, where did you go to college? What did you do? Where did you graduate from? Did you go to grad school? That person wants to leave the room and they don't talk about their education. I've had that with family, with financial status, with religion, politics. So I think I didn't fully know how much hiding was really going on. And that's why my second book is going to be focused on other people's stories of hiding and unhiding, because there's a whole world out there. And that's also why I'm building a community so that for you and me, there are places, it doesn't have to be 30/50/60 years before you unhide. There we can create safe places for unhiding now.
And that people can then feel comfortable having that conversation and coming out with who they really are.
Yeah. And having others, because I know one of the things that when I tell my story or even others tell their stories, there's almost a feeling when I say I was hiding for 25 years, people's shoulders, Dina, drop and they take us almost like an exhale to say, me too. I was hiding. And then once we establish that conversation and that relationship, I get to know you better, but you feel safer talking to me about things. And I feel safer talking to you because now we've established that bond. And then how do we then go out and create that same cycle with others?
Vulnerability is such a thing that I think about, but it's so true. When you're vulnerable, when you can show that piece of yourself, and Brene Brown talks about it, it can really open up. Talk about taking down the walls. You all of a sudden now you can talk to people and open up when you're willing to be vulnerable.
Absolutely. And I think we expect that now. It sounds like in corporations and workplaces, right? We want people to show up as their authentic selves. I actually want people to show up as their best and valued selves at work. Because I don't know that work has to be a therapy session, but I want it so that nobody has to hold back in terms of if they can't get their job done or if something that they're hiding is not supporting them. I'll just share that quickly that there was someone I was talking to who talked to me about having a stutter, and they don't talk at work because they're afraid of that space of people not fitting in or rejecting them or not thinking they're smart. And we talked then through the idea of, well, that's a lot of energy and exhausting. but also then it's not allowing their team to get to know them like you and I have talked about, right? They're not connecting with their team.
Right.
And then their workplace isn't getting their best ideas because they're not sharing their different perspectives or all of the thoughts they're going, because they're exhausted and lonely, hiding and needing to fit in. So what would happen if they start to unhide?
Right, right. So what do you say to parents who are worried about how their children react to seeing someone who looks different? Is it okay for you for children to ask you questions about your limb difference?
I think children, and I would love this conversation with you too. I think children are the most curious, and it's often coming out of kindness. There are exceptions to every rule, but often they're the most curious and kind. What's hard, and I think the way we were raised, and I still see it happening today, because kids will ask me, hey, what happened to your hand? And I'll start to tell them, hey, this is the way I was born. Every one of us has something that's different about us. And immediately a parent or a guardian comes over and does two things, right? They say, I'm so sorry they asked you about your hand. Don't ask. And we've done two things now. We've shared with kids that it's not okay to be curious, which is a brilliant, beautiful thing to be curious, because often when kids ask, they are curious and then they move on. And the second thing we've done, and the message we've sent, is disability is something we don't talk about. Disability is not a topic that's okay. And that's not a good message, because disability is beautiful and disability is difference, and we all have difference. So disability needs to be talked about. So we need to continue to build out that message. So I actually let parents know, I'm glad that they're asking, because it's encouraging on both ends.
Right. And I do two things. One is I think kids are just curious, and sometimes they're a little nervous when they haven't seen something before. So they want to know and understand, so that, like you said, they move on. And I sometimes think we need to do a better job of educating adults than we do with kids, because like you said, they're just curious most of the time.
And the truth is, most of those adults were those kids who were talked about and said, don't be curious and don't talk about disability. So they're just repeating it. And we have to stop it at some place to say, we need to be curious. It's okay to be curious. It's out of kindness and out of support. Don't be curious as adults out of like looking at a traffic accident. Like, that's not the job. It's out of, how can I support you and how can I be curious with kindness?
Right. And so what do you say to new parents and families who may be in the beginning stages of their journey with someone with a limb difference or any difference?
I say three things. I say, first, this is a journey. Your child is going to show you what they need and what they don't need. That's going to be really clear, because you and I both know we took on a lot of things during our lifetime that our parents probably have no idea that ways we accommodated and accomplished things. Second, I say create space for when they do have questions, and ask questions about what's going on, and don't just take everything's okay as the answer. Continue to ask, create that space. And third, and I share this with every parent now, is find your person. Find another parent who is going through this. Find the community so that you have support, because it's also a support that you're looking for, so that you can ask the questions you want to ask, or raise the concerns, or any stage of grief, honestly. Like, go through the acceptance part and the grief part and the denial and the depression and the anger. Like, have a space to do that. Invite someone in. Find your person. Because as people with disabilities, we need to do that too. But those who are raising us need to model that also.
Right. And I will add that I think for people like us, children like us, who said everything was fine, everything's okay, I always tell parents that I think what is not said is as powerful as what is said. And so if a child's saying everything's fine, everything's great, prod a little more and inquire a little bit more, because probably not necessarily the case.
Absolutely.
And go with your gut.
Go with your gut. Absolutely. I mean, we paid a lot of money in school for that, just that expression, go with your gut. Absolutely. And I think it's just creating that space so that they know when it is difficult or challenging, that they can talk about it, and that it's not a taboo subject to not be okay sometimes. And teenagers are tough no matter what, right? Like, that's the reality. They have a lot going on, a lot of hormones, a lot of energy. Yeah. So creating that space, even though it feels like you're nagging or annoying, is important for teens, just to know and just to see that you're looking. I mean, I hid my hand. My parents took me to get a prosthetic. We didn't talk about the feelings in between that.
Right. So knowing what you know now, what is one thing that you would tell your younger self?
Don't hide so long. It's exhausting. It's lonely. It's a time suck. Don't hide so long, because it's not as bad as you think it is in your head. The vision and the message you've sent in your head is so much worse. So invite someone in earlier, and take that risk, to find your person, to just find one person. That's all it starts with, Dina, is it starts with one person.
That's all you need. I always
All
say
you
you
need.
only need one person.
Yeah. And whether
Yeah.
it's in a workplace with a manager or a HR person or a coworker, I say just find that one person that you can share something that you've been holding so that you can then start to explore it. Because once you've said it out loud, it takes away its power, that difficult message power.
Right. So who do you see now when you look in the mirror?
I see someone who is beautiful and strong, and she has this voice, and she's building this community. Like I wouldn't go back. Like it scares me to think, because it is, as you said, it's a journey and it's a continuum. And it scares me to think that I would ever go back to the person that's hiding. Even in those tough moments where I sometimes want to hide, I think about, could you ever go back to that? Like you don't, and I also don't want to allow people in my life who wouldn't accept me. If that's really
Right.
the biggest fear, that people would reject me, why would I want them in my life? Like, so,
Yeah.
and I think that's the beauty of age, is you get to say that to yourself now. It's definitely easier said than done. So it's a journey.
Right.
And I think journaling and therapy and connection and community is so important in this process.
Yeah. And our mental health is really important. That psychosocial piece. And like you said, finding that community, finding the support for parents and the kids and adults. And yeah,
Totally.
all really important.
And if it doesn't feel right, try someone else. I mean,
Right.
I talk about it in my book. I went through a number of therapists because I wanted to understand, why did I start hiding? And none of them really were there. But that's in the book. So,
Okay.
Yeah.
So where can people find you? Do you have a website, and buy your book, Single-Handedly Learning to Unhide and Embrace Connection?
Sure. So I have a website. It's called ruthrathblott.com. And I'm very active on LinkedIn and Instagram. So those are both under my name, Ruth Rathblott and Ruth Rath. And then Single-Handedly comes, Dina, in all forms. It's in paperback, it's on hardcover, it's audiobook, it's on Kindle, all on Amazon and other outlets like barnesandnoble.com, walmart.com. But amazon.com is probably the easiest for most people. And it's, Single-Handedly Learning to Unhide and Embrace Connection. And then I also did a TEDx, which is really a 13-minute easy view.
Yeah, tell us very briefly about your TEDx talk.
Yep. So the TEDx was actually inspiration for the book, because the TEDx is called When I Stopped Hiding, I Found Freedom. And it is just a 13-minute journey of starting to hide and learning to unhide, and that people actually can then see me zip line at the end. So it was a powerful way. And that's where it started, because people started saying, I have felt like I've been hiding too. Like, you need to expand this story and tell us all the details and how you actually unhid. So, yeah.
You inspired me at the time to think about doing my own TED Talk, but then I put it aside. But you never know. I might still do it. So
everyone has a TEDx in them, and everyone has a book in them. So, Dina, I can be an accountability partner if you need one when you're ready.
Thank you. I might take you up on that. So thank you.
Yeah.
So thank you, Ruth, for sharing your journey with us. And you've helped me more than you know, just by sharing your own story of hiding and then unhiding. And I think we've both come a long way from our college days. So I look forward to seeing where your journey takes you in the future. So thank you.
Same. You're doing incredible things, and you inspire me more than you know, because you keep going for it and you keep getting out there. And then I say, I have to continue to go out there and do the same work. It's raising awareness and it's building community at the same time. It's beautiful. So thank you.
Thank you. Ruth is such an inspiration to me and everyone she meets, and everyone has a story, and I'm hopeful that by sharing stories like Ruth's, we can create a kinder world. For more than 70 years, myFace has been dedicated to changing the faces and transforming the lives of children and adults with facial differences by providing access to holistic, comprehensive care, education, resources, and support that pave the way for better outcomes. To learn more, please visit myface.org. If you'd like to learn more about the myFace support groups so that you can connect with others in the craniofacial community, please visit myface.org/online-groups. Be sure to subscribe to myFace, myStory on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube to get notified of our next episode. If you'd like to receive email reminders of new episodes, sign up at myface.org/mystory. That's myface.org/mystory. Thank you for joining us for this episode of myFace, myStory. Remember, it takes courage to share your story, so be brave and speak out.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Paul, the Executive Director of myFace. myFace is a nonprofit organization dedicated to changing the faces and transforming the lives of children and adults with facial differences. We do this through various programs and events such as the Transforming Lives educational webinar series, Races for Faces, the Wonder Project, and the groundbreaking myFace, myStory conversational series. You can learn more about all of these on our website at myface.org. If you enjoyed today's program, we hope you'll consider making a donation to help keep programs like this possible, as well as to further the support of the craniofacial community. Thank you.